Hey, what's up everybody? I'm Dr. Aaron Horschig and welcome back to Squat University. Now today we're going to tackle a little bit of a controversial subject, and that's the topic of butt wink. Now is this the first time anyone has ever talked about this? Not even close. There's a lot of experts out there who have made awesome videos on it like Brett Contreras and Dr. Stuart McGill, and I encourage you to check out those people. Now, I wanted to specifically discuss this today because I've had a lot of people reach out to us and ask our opinion on it. Now, before we get into our opinion, let's talk about exactly what butt wink is. Now, when some people squat, their hips naturally turn under their body like this. And that's the winking motion we're referring to. I'm going to show you what that looks like on myself. Now, if I go to squat, once I get past about 90 degrees, a little bit deeper, my hips naturally pull under my body to get to the deepest position. Now, it's that wink that a lot of people refer to. Now let's talk about why this happens. Well, a lot of times it's an anatomical reason. Let me explain. As we squat, our femurs move this way. It's called flexion. And eventually, in some people, they hit their anatomical end range where their femurs cannot come this way anymore. And in order to squat any deeper, the pelvis is pulled under the body. And that is called butt wink. It's a posterior pelvic tilt. Now, ideally during the squat, we want to maintain this natural lordotic curve in our low back and its relationship with our pelvis. So as we squat, it should remain the exact same. However, when we have that posterior pelvic tilt or butt wink, we lose that relationship. And what we see is that it affects the lumbar spine. It leaves that natural lordotic curve, which no matter how much weight is on your back, can be very healthily and safely sustained by the discs. When forces are placed through the lumbar spine when it's in a flexed position, it can create a disc bulge. And this is theoretically where a lot of the problems arise when people think of butt wink. Is we think naturally, because the spine is in a flexed position, that it's automatically going to create a disc bulge. So this is theoretically the big issue with butt wink. Now, there's a couple things that we need to talk about on this topic. First is it really that big of a deal for everyone and with every type of squat? Let's address that first. Now, during a body weight squat, you should be able, most people, to squat ass to grass all the way down. For some people, they will naturally, like myself, have a little bit of butt wink in order to get there. And in an unloaded squat without a barbell on your back, in my opinion, I don't believe it's that big of a deal to have a little bit of a butt wink. Now, if you're an athlete or someone who's had a history of back injury or are currently dealing with back pain, this is obviously something that we need to take into consideration. And maybe squatting ass to grass, even body weight, isn't right yet because of your history of injury. However, with most people, I don't believe it's that big of a deal if you're a healthy person and you're only doing an unloaded body weight squat. Research has not shown that unloaded squats with excessive posterior pelvic tilting are anywhere a cause for concern for creating a disc bulge. Now, let's talk about barbell squatting. When you have a bar on your back, there's going to be a lot more forces that are pushed through your spine. So if we have excessive pelvic tilt, it does place us at a higher degree of risk for sustaining a disc bulge in that area and placing harm to our back and potential injury. Now, this comes at the subjective call of the coach as to what is excessive and what is something that's potentially fine. There's plenty of examples of Olympic lifters with a little bit of posterior pelvic tilt at the very bottom of the snatch and clean and jerk in order to sit at the deepest depth.
Here's a great example of an elite athlete who shows a very small amount of butt wink or posterior pelvic tilt in the very bottom of his snatch in order to reach the greatest depth and remain upright. Let's now review this one more time. If we go back to the beginning, we can see the pelvis turn under very slightly at the very bottom position of his snatch. As he ascends, the pelvis then realigns and remains in sync with the lumbar spine the rest of the way up.
Now, is this really hurting their back? In my belief, if it's a small amount of posterior pelvic tilt in the very bottom of a squat, for a healthy athlete, I don't believe it's that big of a cause for concern. Now, obviously, an athlete who has an injury history, we need to take that into consideration, and maybe that's not the best thing for them. However, the big cause for concern is whenever this posterior pelvic tilt is excessive early on in the motion. And what happens is it creates a ton of flexion in that lower back and really causes an athlete, no matter how good their mobility is elsewhere, to lose their core stability and spinal stability. Therefore, with a loaded barbell on their back, they're placed at a greater risk for a back injury due to their butt wink.
Here's a great example of excessive butt wink during a barbell squat. As you can see, when the athlete reaches the bottommost position of the squat, his hips are pulled underneath his body and he has lost spinal stability.
So it's really a subjective call during a barbell squat whether or not that butt wink is excessive and could potentially place them at injury, or is really only a little bit at the very end, and in my opinion, is not as big of a deal as many today have made it out to be. Now, the last thing we need to talk about is whether or not this butt wink can be changed. Now, a lot of the reason for this butt wink is due to an anatomical limitation in the femur flexing forward. And research has really shown us that there's not really that much that we can do to improve upon this. So a lot of times the amount of butt wink an athlete has is natural to their anatomy, and we can't really change that. However, as a coach, I urge you to look elsewhere also when you see an athlete with this problem. For example, an athlete that has stiff ankles, on the way down, they're going to reach their end range of ankle mobility, and in order to squat deeper, that pelvis is going to have to pull under excessively in order to squat to a greater depth. Therefore, theoretically, improving an athlete's ankle mobility will allow them to maintain that natural spine and pelvis relationship into a deeper squat. So always look elsewhere before always assuming that it's only an anatomical restriction that's causing the butt wink. Now, my overall goal with this video was to show you guys that butt wink, when only a little bit of movement is shown, is not necessarily as big of a deal as many have made it out to be. As a coach, it's important to understand whether that athlete's moving into that tilt during a bodyweight squat, which in my opinion is not as big of a deal, or if it's during a barbell squat. And if it's excessive during a barbell squat, it may show that that athlete naturally isn't set up to go ass to grass with a barbell on their back. So always take that into consideration. Now, I hope you found this to be an informative video. Let me know if you have any questions. Happy squatting.